Hello and welcome to the 1100 Project, a brand new podcast which is going to be chronicling the journey that I take as a self published author through all the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the difficult parts, the more positive and joyous parts, and talking about how things really are, the real journey from conception all the way through to a published book and beyond as well. My name is Stuart White. I am the founder of Write Mentor. I am a writer. I've been writing for best part of 15 years now on a serious level. I wasn't the kind of person who, as a child, was a big writer. It's something I came to a little bit later in life. I always have had a love of reading, though, and that has been what has inspired me to become a writer myself. So, for the last 15 years or so, I've been going through a bit of a write, reject, write, reject, write, reject cycle. And for many of you listening, I know that you will be very familiar with this cycle. It's something that has probably consumed a lot of your waking thoughts as you've sent your work out and then had to comprehend that it's not going to be accepted to be taken on, to be submitted for publication. And then you have to move on to the next book. And then maybe you've gone through the same cycle again and then moved on to the next book and so on. Now, I've already recorded a whole series called the Rejection Diaries, where we magnify and focus in upon how that affects us as writers, some of the strategies we use to help us cope with it, and ways to ensure that we bounce back from it and ultimately we continue writing and being creative. You can obviously go and check that out if you're interested in that, and I'll put a wee link to that just in the notes below the podcast. But what this particular one is going to focus upon is how I have decided to maybe go on a different path in terms of publication and getting my work and my writing out there and into the hands of the people that I really want to read it, the children that I write for, as soon as possible and on my terms, taking more control, taking more autonomy and power over how that actually happens. Now, the 1100 project, the name that I've given for this, simply put, is because I want to see if it's possible for me to go down the self-publishing route and then sell 1,000 copies of the book and get 100 reviews within 12 months. Now, I'm aware of how ambitious that task is. It's going to require a lot of effort, a lot of time investment. It's going to require me to ask a lot of favors of people and to make a lot of contacts with various people that might help me to achieve this, because it's certainly not something I think that a person can do on their own. And we'll talk more and more about that throughout the duration of this podcast, both in this episode, but also in future episodes as well. So if you follow this podcast, you'll be able to follow the progress of that, and we'll do an update with every episode on how that's going after publication of the book. One of my writing friends, Kezia Lupu, she's the chief editor, senior editor, pardon me, at Chicken House Books, and she's a YA author in her own right as well. She said on Twitter recently that she thought, in her opinion, and obviously there'll be different views in this, that any author who self-publishes and sells over 1,000 copies is doing really well. So that's the reason why I've set the bar at that particular number. Now, obviously, if it falls short, then I will probably. I'll be honest, I'll probably be disappointed. It's something that I hope that I'll be able to achieve. But if I fall short, then that's okay as well. We're aiming for that number just to give ourselves an ambitious target to work towards. And then obviously, similarly, if it exceeds that, then we'll reset the bar and obviously move the target slightly higher. One of my good writing friends, Sally, she has, I think she's just over a year now. She's had her very successful self-published book out. It's Toby and the Silver Blood Witches, if you're interested. And she has sold, I think she's nearly 1,000 copies now. And that's sort of part of the reason that I've also chosen that target as well, because seeing someone I know been able to get as close to that target as she has makes me think, well, it is doable. I mean, her book is excellent, and I'm not necessarily suggesting that mine is anywhere near as good, but I am hopeful that with the edits that I'm going to be doing on it over the next few months, and we'll talk more about the editing process and how thorough that is going to be, how even comparable it might be to those who are traditionally published as well. And we'll see how the book obviously finishes up, and hopefully there will be some people out there that enjoy it and like it, and want to recommend it, and uh, ask other people or tell other people that they should buy it and read it. Now, what is my purpose in doing this, aside from obviously getting the book out there and it being published? Because it's not just about that. If that was the case, I might well have done this a number of years ago. But I do believe that the publishing landscape is changing at the moment. It's evolving, and the reason I believe that is because when you look at some of the things that are in place now, they allow you to be able to distribute your book on a very flexible and variable scale, which means that you no longer have to do, like you maybe had to do 10, 15 years ago, do big print runs on your own, taking big financial risks, storing books yourself, distributing the books, taking them to the post office, postage back, blah, blah, blah. All those other things that you'd have had to have done, a lot of that's now taken care of for you. And there's various places, and we're going to discuss the various ways in which that happens now. But those things are in place, which means that it allows you to maybe do things that you couldn't do in the past. And that's one of the reasons why I'm choosing to do this now. I'm ready after a very long time of trying to publish the traditional way, to take a different path. Now, if you don't know me well, or you've not followed me on social media or in any of my other podcasts, a bit about my history. I have in the past submitted work to agents and publishers and had offers, and they've just not been right for me for whatever reason. In fact, I got very close to publishing a book in 2018 and decided against it in the end. And there was a few reasons for that, which I'm not going to bore you by going into, but it didn't feel right for me, and that's fine. I think that happens at various times to various authors. If things don't feel right, then you have full power and control, and this is something I'm going to talk a lot about, is about power and control and autonomy over your own writing, and how your book gets published, and the way that everything is done, how it's packaged, how the cover is done, the blurbs that you get, when it is released. All of these things these days are certainly a lot more within your control than they've ever been, and I'm hoping that this project and the podcast that goes alongside the project will help to sort of empower people. And that's what I want to do. That's what I'm hoping to achieve with the podcast, is to empower authors to think, okay, that this is one option. So going down the traditional route, and most of you will know about that. Most of you are listening, that you'll submit your work to an agent, they'll submit it to a publisher, and if it gets accepted, it'll be published by them. But there are obviously pros and cons to that method. But just to show as well, and that's the contrast of this podcast, that there is an alternative to that. And what we'll be doing over the course of the next year on the podcast is I'll be discussing obviously my own progress and my own insights, but I'll also be getting a series of guests on. So that's people who have gone down this route as well, people who have collaborated with me in terms of producing my book, people who have collaborated with other people that I know who have gone down this route, and we'll get a real multi-perspective on this process, and the way in which all of you, every single person listening to this podcast right now, can potentially go with your books and your writing if you choose to do so. So that's my little introductory spiel about what I'm planning to do, and the premise behind both the project, the podcast. Now, episode 1, this is the first episode. So we're going to be talking about a number of different things. And I'll list all these things in the notes below the podcast, so that we can do a little recap, or you can do a scan if you're just coming to this, and you can sort of skip to the part that interests you. But I have been doing this for a while. it's been a long slog of writing books, sending them out, writing books, sending them out, right, and so on, and the cycle's going on. I, I've been very close at times to what I've wanted. I've also gotten what I think I wanted, but then later realised it wasn't. And this is something that's really important, and we'll discuss a lot as well. Is you have to be getting what you want out of this process. There's no point in just going along with things just to get published. And I know that might sound a little hypocritical because of the route I'm choosing to go down, but it's not just, and this is probably the most emphatic point that I can make in everything I'm going to discuss. It's not just about getting your book published because, as I say, I could have just done that years ago if that's what it was about. It is about having control and power and doing this the way I want to do it and the way that I think is best for me, for my books, and for getting it to the people that I want to read it. And that is a personal choice. And you might listen to this and think, that's not me. That's not the route that I want to go down personally. And that's absolutely fine. And part of what I do, the work I do with Right Mentor, is about helping people to make connections with people in the industry and giving them opportunity to get their work in front of people that might help them go down that traditional route. But in the in the interest of providing an alternative, that is what we're going to be discussing in this podcast, the alternative route to that traditional one. So yeah, it's been a long slog. The last I've got to be honest with you. Over the last 15 years, have there been times where I've thought I might just give up on writing? It's not for me. The weight of all the rejections coming through has been a bit much, and the honest answer I think is yes to that. I think a lot of people, I see a lot of posts on social media from people who have been published saying things like, "I was close to giving up and I didn't, and I got published," and so on. And those are quite inspiring to read, I think. But I would also, I guess, preface that with it's kind of okay to take breaks or to take time away from it. And if you if you decide you don't go back to it after that, that's also okay. I think for me, I did give up because I enjoyed the process of creating stories too much. I especially like drafting and plotting new ideas. There are other aspects of the whole thing that maybe I don't enjoy as much. Editing been one of them. I don't particularly like going over the same story, especially I have this aversion, and I'm getting it a little bit now looking in the camera as I'm recording here, but I don't particularly like looking back at myself or my work, or when I listen back to podcasts, hear my voice when I have to sort of edit the videos and um, sound files after a podcast. I don't love that, I've got to be honest. And I get the same kind of feeling when I'm editing my own work as well. So that's part of the process I don't necessarily love. But we are going to actually talk a little bit more about editing later, so I'll maybe put a pin that for now. But yeah, over the last while, there have been times where I've thought, yes, I might not keep doing this. Most notably, 2018, when I decided not to go ahead with that publishing deal that I had. I then went through a really bad spell of depression and um, really struggled with writing. And we talk a lot about things like writer's block and so on. But I'm not sure that's an actual thing that exists. I think you just choose not to write, or you're not able to write because of other factors. I don't necessarily think writer's block is a thing. Like, so for example, I know that for me the reason I couldn't and didn't write was depression, and actually when that got better, because it's not the kind of thing that just goes away, but it certainly improves. And when that got better, I felt my creative side, my writing, and so on, coming back, and I enjoyed it and got back into it. So yeah, that was a particularly difficult time, and I've got to be honest again. That's where a lot of Marcus' thoughts were, and I thought, yeah, I'm not going to keep going. And funnily enough, that coincided with the time where I had just begun Mentor, and that's something else. That's another thing which is a heavy load for me over the last 4 or 5 years is running the organisation, expand the organisation, helping as many writers as we have in as many different ways as we have, but also balancing that with my own writing and my own dreams of publishing a book. And yeah, I think that's been a difficult balance. So it's not always been easy, but I do feel like I'm at a point, both in terms of my my ability to write a book, in terms of having the right book as well, and being at a point where I think I can do all the other aspects of self publishing, which this involves. And we'll talk all about those a little bit later on. I feel like I'm at a stage where I can now go ahead with that process. And that's why I've made the decision to do that. Now, those of you who subscribe to my newsletter will already have caught wind of this plan, and I've maybe given you a little bit of outline on how I plan to do it, but we'll talk more about the specifics of it, not just in the first episode today, but in the continuing episodes as we progress through the various chapters of this podcast. So let's talk a little bit about the traditional publishing, because we touched on it earlier on. You submit to an agent, they submit to a publisher. If you're lucky, if things go well, they happen to have a spot open, they love your story, the sales team think they can sell it, then you might go offered a publishing deal traditionally, and that's fantastic. And for some people, that goes on to bring forward and launch their career, and they do well. And some people can even give up their other work and other jobs to go and become a full-time writer. However, and I'm trying to provide a balanced view here. I know a lot of writing friends who do have the traditional publishing deal. They've got the thing that they've yearned for, the thing that so many unpublished and unagented writers really want. And they've got that. It's just not been quite what they wanted. There's been a plethora of bad experiences, or they've had a good experience, but the book hasn't sold, and they've maybe not been picked up again for another book. There are a lot of cons to that traditional side of publishing as well. So, just for the sake of balance, I thought it's worth mentioning that. And I know that many of you listening here will say, and I know some of the people who might be listening who have spoken to about this have said, I only want to traditionally publish. So I'll keep writing books and I'll keep sending them out, and however long that takes is how long it takes. And I think that's a perfectly valid viewpoint. It's certainly one that I held for quite a while, and was very determined that that is the only route that I was going to go down. But fortunately, as humans, we have something called elasticity in our neurons, a flexibility to change pathways. We don't have to continue to think in the same way. We don't have to continue to do the same things that we've always done. We can change. We can evolve. We can change the firing of those electrical impulses through the neural pathways, and we can alter our pathway, alter our writing destiny, if you want to put it in a magnanimous way. And I think that that's something that's certainly happened with me over the last year or two. And there's been a number of stimulus that have triggered that for me. One of them is becoming more and more conscious of my mortality and getting older. And I'm sure that all of you, or some of you out there, will be thinking about all those tweets you see that constantly tell us how old some famous authors were when they were first published. And I know that some of them were a bit older, 60s, 70s, even 80s. I've seen in some of those tweets. Um, but that is where I think I want to focus on this podcast, to say that's fine. And I can be patient, and and it might take me 10 years or 20 years, but it might never happen. And this is something that I've been a wee acutely aware of, is that sometimes we allow life to be determined by external forces that we don't really have much control over. And we obviously can control what we write in our manuscript, but there is a ton of hurdles, a ton of barriers before you get published, which you cannot control and you have no input over. And this is what I want to focus on here, about how we can remove those barriers and take control of your book and its destination and every other facet and element of it. So why have I decided personally to self-publish then and not to go down that traditional route that we've been discussing? A big part of it for me is because I've written a book that I would like to get into the hands of maybe a niche population of children, one that potentially publishers would look at and think, actually, are we going to make that much of a return on sales if it's aimed specifically at quite a small cross section of the population? So my book that I am going to be self-publishing is called Ghosts of Mars. It's a middle grade sci-fi book, more like an adventure, though it's not too heavy on the sci-fi, that is set on a futuristic colony on Mars. And it features a main character, a little girl who has type 1 diabetes, and she was born on Mars. She's the first Martian, which is obviously a big element of her personality in the story, and the things that happen within it, and how she's treated and so on. And I wanted to publish this book because I have not read too many books for kids that age which feature type 1 diabetic main characters, and ones which still are heroes and still are able to do all the things that kids without the condition are able to do within a book. And it certainly, although it causes a lot of setbacks and problems at times for her as a character, and for other people as well around her, it's not something that defines her, the way she lives her life or her ambitions. And I wanted to put in a bit of positive representation of that condition with my main character. And I'm hoping there might be some kids out there at late primary, early secondary school who might be struggling with the condition, because that's an age at which they traditionally really struggle with it. I know from, I'm a school teacher myself, so I know from kids who I've taught with the condition that there's a lot of time spent at reception with them at breaks and lunches, and sometimes even during lessons, helping them with their hypos and various things. So I want to publish the book for that reason as well, to get the book into the hands of kids who I think would benefit from it, even if it's just to see someone like them as a main character in a book. And I know that's an ambition that a lot of people share when they write a book. They want to show that particular thing in the main character, so it inspires the young children that can see themselves. And I think that's an important reason why I've decided to do the self-publishing route. But there's also a whole array of other factors as well, including what I alluded to at the start about the accessibility of self-publishing now, and the different ways in which it's much easier to do than it's ever been. However, I would caveat that self-publishing is slightly more, or in fact not slightly, a lot more difficult if you are writing for children. And obviously the further down you go, the more tricky it can be, because I know that picture book and chapter book have, for example, illustration as a heavy feature of them, and so it's a collaborative thing with an illustrator more than it's about the author producing the content and so on. So that's something obviously to consider. But I've seen a lot of people very successfully go down the self-publishing route in both the adult and YA spaces, and there are also examples within the children's fiction area as well. And I'll mention a few of those people later when we get to that particular chapter, and discuss how well they've done, and the ways they've done it, and the ways they've also chronicled their approach and their journey, and how they've managed to, even though they've gone down the road themselves, they've still managed to create a successful career from writing books for children. So I've decided to self-publish because I do want to take more control. I want to, for example, I'm currently working with a very, very talented illustrator on the cover of my novel, and I have had so much input into it, an incredible amount, from small details to sort of the bigger things as well. And I know from being close friends with and having that brief experience as well, of publishing myself, that author input it's there. It's certainly there. And when you go down the traditional publishing route, but it's not always to the same extent as this is. And I certainly know of people who have been disappointed with the covers that they've been presented with by their publisher. And I guess the advantage of self-publishing is you do have a greater input into what is finally produced, and that's important. That I think that was important for me when when I decided to go down this route, was that something like the cover was in the style that I see it in my head and I imagined it, and which I also think is very appealing for kids, and shows my character and represents them in the best possible way, so that children will see themselves in the cover and pick up that book. That's the idea anyway. We'll obviously the proof is in the pudding, so we will see what people think of it when it's finally out. But I'm excited about that, and it's something that I don't think you can underestimate how much of a how important it is to be able to have that level of input into it. But yeah, so that's another reason why I've decided to go down that route myself. And you might think, well, that's just quite a small thing, but it goes across everything. We're going to talk more about this later on, but I really have been massively empowered by the whole situation, and it's what's inspired me to do this project, for example, and share some of the positive feelings that I've got from taking this step. So, what have I actually decided to self-publish? So I've talked a little bit about what the book is and what it's about, but I am going to be publishing a middle grade children's fiction book, which is going to be aimed for the 8 to 12 age group, and it's going to be in ebook format, but also in paperback, and that's important because kids that age, I think it's I think it's 96%. I'll double check those figures and correct it in the edits if I have to, but I think it's 96% of children's books for that age group are paperback, and the vast majority are bought by adults as well, not by the children themselves. So although having the ebook format is useful, some kids and some adults who read middle grade fiction, which I am one of, sometimes prefer the ebook format, but the paperback is obviously the one that's the kids are most likely to buy. So it's going to be produced in that, and it's been quite a journey learning a lot more about how paperbacks are produced, and even ebooks. It's far more complicated, and there's a lot more steps to it and things that you need to know than you could possibly imagine. But that again is another chapter in the podcast that we're going to do, and we'll talk more about that at the appropriate time. So the last wee bit of this section that I want to talk about was I've just written down here power transference, and that's an important thing for me personally. For me, we often feel that we're at the whim of other people when it comes to writing and its chances of publication, and we are ultimately we're at the whim of one, two, three, maybe up to 7 or 8 adults before a decision is made that they're going to publish your book, and that's quite hard, to break through. And you know that agents get 200, sometimes 400 submissions a week, and for the chances of them taking on people, if they're taking on 3, 4, 5 clients a year, sometimes at best, sometimes they take on less than that, your chances are very, very slim of getting through that. And then of course you've got to go in submission to publishers, which some I've experienced once, but I know a lot of my friends have done a number of times now, and is not an easy experience. Often the feedback from publishers is simply, this is an excellent book, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and we just have something in that space, or we just don't think the sales team think it's going to sell, or the publicity team just don't see the pitch in there, the thing that's going to get it picked off the shelf or whatever. So there's a lot of people to impress, a lot of barriers to potentially getting it published that way. So by removing all them, I feel very empowered. As I say, I'm very involved in the process, but I'm also very empowered in terms of knowing that it will happen. I'm no longer worried about industry. I don't know what the right word for it is, norms or standards, or what's hot right now, what's selling. I know that a lot of people are worried, that they have, for example, invested a lot of time in their picture books, and again, it's all Chinese whispers, isn't it? But someone did say that the picture books are just not selling like they were, or they're and actually across all age ranges. The rumor is, and again, it's all Chinese whispers, so this probably isn't 100% true, that publishers are more reluctant to take on debuts at the moment, and they're focusing a wee bit more on established authors. There's a certain movement towards buying in more YA at the moment, rather than middle grade. But again, it's all just whispers round the back of the barn, isn't it? It's rather than anything concrete. But the problem is, all that gets in your head as a writer. I know that all of you listening just now will know that it gets in your head when someone, even if it's not someone particularly knowledgeable, says something about middle grade not selling. You're suddenly like, I need to give up a middle grade and go and do something else. Or if someone says picture books aren't selling, you suddenly give up on that and go and write your chapter books. Or it can get in your head, and it can really affect you. And it can affect your productivity, your creativity, your overall mood, and your feelings of hope, and ultimately hopelessness, as you feel like, well, what's the point in me pushing on with this middle grade if it's less likely to sell and so on. And that is a hard thing to completely get out of your mind. So I do think that not having that in my certainly my front windscreen, it's maybe still a little bit there in the rear view mirror, but it's not in the front windscreen, and so it's not right in front of me blocking my path, and that is really empowering. And that's something that, if anyone is considering going down this route and so on, that is definitely the key thing that I've found that has made a big difference with me. So yeah, there is a famous saying that says the best view comes after the hardest climb. Now, the reason that I thought of this particular saying is because the very opening of my book involves my character climbing up quite a high hill on Mars to get the view of a rocket landing at their base, at their colony, and she stares out at it, and she sees a tiny speck in the sky, which is Earth. She sees the Martian moons, and she sees, of course, the rocket coming in and so on. But it's quite a nice scene. But it comes at the end of her having worked very, very hard to get up that hill, and then she's getting a reward, which is the scene afterwards. And I wonder, for me anyway, I've been thinking about this a lot over the last few weeks. I wonder if the 10 plus years, more than a decade of been knocked back, trying to climb that hill and getting knocked back down a wee bit, and then, picking up the rock and trying to go up again. It's the whole rolling the rock up the hill. And yeah, I think that continually having to go back down and start again, go back down and start again. Now that I don't necessarily have to push that rock up the hill, and I can go up on my own terms and still get to the top and still enjoy the view because of all the hard work that's gone into it. That's maybe just making this particular view all the sweeter. And yeah, that's I guess how I'm feeling at the moment, having made that decision. And yeah, as I say, it's not going to be for everyone, but if you're considering it, it's something that's worth looking into, and hopefully what you'll hear from me over the next year or so might convince you that it could well be the road that you go down as well. So why my writing and my books are important? Why have decided that they need to be published because, let's face it, thousands, millions of people have written a book, and most of them aren't published. So why not? Why do I feel that I'm or my book or my writing is more important than those millions of books that have never been published? Or equally as important as all of those books that have been published, because that's an important thing to ask yourself when you're thinking about self-publishing. Or is it a vanity thing? Is it an ego thing? Do you just want your book to be available and say I'm a published author and be able to sell it? Is that what you're doing it for? And no judgment if that's the reason you're doing it. That's totally down to you, and there might be a bit of self-fulfillment and happiness that comes from that, and so certainly no judgment on it. For me, I think I'd be lying if I said there was no degree of ego, if there was no degree of vanity about it. I think it'd be a lie. I think any author would be lying if they said that there's none of that involved in publishing a book, because you've got to believe that your book's worth reading, or you would never have written it and sent it out into the world. You've got to believe that your words are worth people paying money for, or you wouldn't have put it up to an agent to sell to a publisher to then sell to people and put money in your pocket. You've got to, I think, have a little bit of ego, a little bit of vanity, and a uh, whole heap of self confidence about what you've written and why it's important for people. And I think about this a lot. Like when I'm writing books, I think about what impact is this book going to have? What legacy will it have? Because obviously we are mortal beings. We will exist upon this rock and draw in air for a finite time. And when that time is over, we'll rot, and all that'll be left of us are some old bones. But also, and this is the key thing about writing, and this is what I like about it, our books will be left behind. We leave behind that legacy that our children or younger generations will still have of us. There'll still be echoes of our voice in the words that we've written, little echoes for those that we've left behind on this planet to read and get a little sense of us. I know it's our characters, but our characters are they've got to they have come out of this series of neurons that are inside of our skull, and so it is a part of us, I think, and there is a legacy element to it. And as someone who suffers from chronic illness, I've got a couple of autoimmune diseases. Um, I'm a little bit pessimistic sometimes about my sort of chances of having a very long life because of my various ailments. And so for me, there is a degree of that as well. It's sort of leaving a wee legacy behind. And if I wait 10 years to get published and just keep ploughing away at that traditional route, I might not be here to have my work published. I wait 20 years, there's a good chance I might not be. 30 and 40, a very good chance. And so I think that's also a small element in what I'm doing. I think if anyone claims they're publishing a book entirely for selfless reasons and that they don't benefit themselves, then I wonder if they maybe just need to have a think again and be a bit more honest with themselves. So yeah, I think about this. I think about, well, my wife, my children, my family. Will they be proud when I publish a book? I think they will be. Will my friends think much of it? I think they'll probably think, as non-writers often do, that it's quite a big deal to have written a book. And also, people who aren't involved in writing and publishing don't actually care how and where and why your book's published. They don't look up the publisher name. They just see your book and they start reading it. And if it's good, they'll keep reading. And if it's not very good, they'll stop. Doesn't matter if your book was in a 6-way auction and you got £1 million advance. It doesn't really matter to the reader ultimately. And it's one of those things that I've had to reset in my mind a little bit over the last couple of months as I've made this decision, is to get all of those old thoughts, those old ways of thinking out of my mind. Because again, for me, I thought for a long time that was the only way to get published was to get all the agents fighting over your manuscript to go in an auction to a big publisher, get a big advance, get the big marketing budget, see your book cover all over buses and all over the tube and all the Waterston stores. But there's other ways to do it, and I think that's that for me anyway. It brings me a lot of joy and happiness, hope and optimism, and I think, well, I certainly hope that it will bring that for all of you too, who are listening, because yeah, um, readers don't actually care how it's published. And the key thing and the hard part about going down this route, the self publishing route, is how do you get the readers? Because that's where traditional publishing, obviously, the huge pro is over self publishing. They have those established links, routes, people, who are on salaries specifically to do those jobs. Whereas in self publishing, you're doing it yourself, and as much as you might outsource things, and we'll talk more about outsourcing the various jobs you have to people in another chapter. But as much as you might want to outsource things to people, it does come at a risk and a cost and so on. And so that particular aspect can be difficult. But as I say, we'll come back to that. We'll put a little pin in that particular thought for just now. Another thing I've thought about a lot as well is my parents, and will they care? I for context, I don't. I certainly don't speak to my dad. He's very much out of the picture. Unfortunately, he's not spoke to me for a long time. My mum speaks to me more regularly, but still not very often. And I often wonder, do they even know that I write? Let alone when I publish my book, will they even know about it, or be bothered, or will they be proud of me? Will they care? And that's a little sort of for me personally anyway. That's quite a melancholic thing to consider. Is I guess when a lot of people get published, or they publish their book, the parents are very proud. And I've seen a few of my friends, for example, and I've seen how their parents have gone about, like, walking around with their child's book cover on their in t-shirts and selling them at the local coffee shop and local bookshops and so on. And yeah, in some ways that makes me a little bit sad, thinking, well, I'm not going to necessarily have that. But I have plenty of other support, and I know that maybe even some of the people that are listening to this podcast right now will be in my corner and will be happy to, I guess, take that role and be proud for me, and maybe spread the word about the book and help me get it into the hands of the people that I want to read it and to see themselves within. So yeah, that's something that's been, I guess, consuming my mind a little bit as well. That's not really to do with the technicalities of that particular publishing route, but more to do with the emotional side of it. Maybe a more personal side. But again, we'll put a wee pin in that. I'll maybe talk more about that later on if we're getting close to publication and so on, and how those particular things play out and how I feel about it then. So, what is to come on this particular podcast? Because I guess some of you might be listening to this episode and thinking, is it just going to be Stuart going on and on and on about what he's thinking and feeling about various things? And it's not. This particular episode obviously is an introductory one, so I am talking a little bit more about that. But obviously, we're going to be talking each episode about my progress towards the goal, which is the 1,100, the 1,000 sales of the book and the 100 reviews within 12 months. And as I say, I'll give you a wee update on that once we get to that particular stage. For now, there's a lot of other things to cover, first of all, and we will talk about those as well. So we'll also be, I think anyway, having a comprehensive look at what's involved in self-publishing a children's book too. And again, I'm not getting ahead of myself. I'm hoping that I'm able to fulfill what I'm saying here, but to a high standard, and even possibly to a similar standard to what we'd get if we went down the traditional route. And I'm certainly trying to take steps to ensure that. Like a lot of the reason that self-publishing maybe doesn't have the most reputable name is because people, they maybe don't have the funds to do it properly. And this is something that's worth thinking about, actually. If you're a traditionally published author, or you hope to get traditionally published, a lot of people think that their book gets published, and they don't necessarily think about the costs involved to the publisher in order just to get your book ready to actually be printed, and so on. And because I've obviously been doing this myself and trying to replicate the various stages that a traditional publisher would, it's become quite enlightening to see how much cost is involved. And yeah, it's a lot of money, and it's one of those things, I guess, authors maybe forget how much their traditional publisher is inputting into the production of their novel. And again, that's something else I'm going to have to put a pin in and discuss in another episode, because it is a whole episode within itself to go through all that. So yeah, I'm hoping it'll be a comprehensive look at what's involved. I'm hoping the actual journey as well, the project that we're going to embark together. I'm doing this with me, but obviously with you as well, and that's why I'm sharing it. Will be a story within itself. Now, obviously, I've got a story in the book, and that's an important one to me, and I'm hoping that when people get to read it, they'll enjoy it and so on. But yeah, it's not just about the story within the book; it's the story of how a single individual is setting a target, is working towards a particular goal, and there are a lot of obstacles to overcome. There are a lot of barriers, a lot of them internal and sort of self afflicted, and others which obviously come in the course of doing self publishing right. But and that's how it replicates a story itself. It's if you think about the story structure and the stages that are involved when you're actually writing a story, it's very similar to what I will be going through over the next year, just trying to to do this project, the 1100 project, and get to the ultimate goal at the end of it. And one thing that probably I should make clear at this stage before I get into any details about it is that although it's a single person that's leading this particular story over the next year, like any good book, there will be a strong support cast. There'll be secondary characters who play a vital role, without which the book couldn't be published, and certainly not published to the standard that I'm hoping it will be published to. So that is a thing that's very, very much worth saying at this stage. And obviously, those people who are involved in that are people I'm hoping that will come on and actually have a chat with me, and and you can listen in on how they have contributed to that. And it's there's so many sayings about it, but no person is an island. Everyone requires the support and help of other people, and self-publishing is no different in that regard. So yeah, we're going to do this series of interviews with various professionals involved, and it'll be interesting because, as I say, I am going to try and get everyone who is involved in it to come on and chat. You get to hear their input, and you'll be able to maybe then get ideas for yourself if you decide that maybe you want to go down this particular route on your own. Okay. Now, as well as my own particular journey, I hope that over the course of the year or so we're doing this project, that you won't just be hearing from me. The plan is to also speak to other authors who either A, are quite far down this road, have been self-publishing for a while, have been doing it successfully and so on, to hear their insights and experience and tips and so on. But also people who are in the midst of it and are still quite new to it, and those who are thinking about it as well. It might be quite interesting to get like a Q&A type session, or some people on to who are considering going down that route very soon, and sort of do like a sort of FAQs, or yeah, Q&A to go over the main things that people might be interested in knowing about, especially if it's something that's A, not covered in the course of the podcast, or B, is not covered in enough detail within the course of the podcast. So that will be an interesting little aside as we go through the journey of the project. We'll have these additional outtakes and looks into alternative lenses, alternative pathways and journeys that people have taken, which are all likely to be very, very different from mine. And that's probably the one thing that I've taken from discussing this lots with friends who have self-published, is that no two journeys, and this the same is true of traditional publishing. To be honest, no two journeys are exactly alike. And if you're sitting there at the moment thinking, I want my journey to be exactly like this or exactly like that author, or you have your own ideas of how it's going to work out, the chances are you might be waiting a long, long time for that to happen. Or if it does happen for you, it doesn't happen in that way. You might just be disappointed rather than appreciating and being joyful for how it actually has gone down for you. And that's something that's worth considering as well, is about being flexible about how things work out. And this is something, again, I talk a lot to other writers about this, but sometimes the author who has their first book out and it's fought over by publishers and they get a lot of money and they maybe win lots of awards, or they sell lots of copies, or things just go very well for them, and that's obviously great for them, and during that particular period they will be ecstatic, they'll be living the dream and so on. But I also often wonder what happens next. So you've won all the awards, you've got a huge amount of money from your first few books that you've maybe sold in a two book deal or whatever, or even bigger for some people. I know an author friend who got an 8 book deal within the last year or two. You get all this, and then what? And I wonder if actually starting small, which is what I'm doing, quite a humble way, is actually a better way to build. And this book might do all right, it might do terribly. Either way, I'll learn a lot from it. I'll pick myself back up, and that failure will then make the next attempt hopefully more successful because I'll have learned my lessons. I think we're all flawed humans, aren't we? And I think sometimes the only way that we can progress towards our dreams and our ambitions and our goals is to just go for it, even if we don't feel ready yet, or it feels too soon. Just still go for it. And sometimes just by failing and then getting up and going again, and failing and getting up and go, you actually learn a lot more than if you just were holding off to wait until you're ready, if that makes sense. I've been listening to a few podcasts recently that have discussed this kind of approach to life as well. And sometimes you do just have to go out and grab life and take control and autonomy and power over your own destiny, over your own book's destiny, your own writing destiny, and do the thing, maybe the thing that scares you the most, but actually just look that fear right in the eye and say, okay, it terrifies me to do this, but if I do it now, the next time it'll be easier. And that's perhaps a nice way to look at some of the more difficult things in life, and maybe that's a way to approach your writing life as well. As I say, it's not going to be for everyone. There are alternative pathways for every aspect of life, not just writing. There's lots of ways to do particular things, but this is the route I'm going to go down. I am going to go at it full heartedly. I've got a bit of a all or nothing personality type. I just absolutely absorb myself in things, or I don't do them at all. So the fact that I'm doing this means that I'm going to be completely committed to it, very absorbed in it, and I'm going to just give it my absolute best shot. And if it falls short, that's okay. I can live with that because I've tried. I think what the thing I couldn't live with probably is, maybe lying, I don't know, 5 years from now, 10, maybe 30 or 40 years from now on my deathbed and saying, well, I tried, or I didn't try even, and I kept going down a particular route, and I didn't learn my lesson that it wasn't working for me that way, and I regret that. And I'd rather maybe regret or have small regrets over going down this particular pathway than have much bigger regrets further down the line for holding out for a dream that never really had any realistic chance for me. So I think we will probably finish off there for today. We're going to talk obviously a lot more about the ins and outs, the specifics of this process, because there's a lot to talk about and unpack over the next few months. The plan is to publish the book in January.
So there's a few months to go, but as those of you who are traditionally published or those who are in the know about the process, the stuff behind the scenes takes a long time. It's years, a couple of years, 3 years sometimes even longer for traditional publishing. So there is a lot still going on behind the scenes for me. Currently going through developmental edits, hoping to have those done by the end of the month, and then on to line edits, copy edits, proofs before the end of the year, with some quick turnarounds, hopefully. Cover reveal, pre-orders, lots and lots and lots to do, and lots to discuss over the next few episodes as well on that particular note. So, yes, thanks very much for listening, everyone. If you've managed to stay with me for the full time for this particular episode of the 1100 Project. My name's Stuart White, and I'll see you all next time.